On a fog-heavy night in Charleston, South Carolina, two women gave birth only hours apart inside the Grand Peton mansion. One was a French countess, the other her enslaved attendant. By morning, both babies were gone from their cribs, replaced by children who would grow into lives and fortunes that were never meant for them. What followed was a deception carefully built over 34 years with forged papers, secret murders, and an underground network so elaborate that when it finally collapsed in 1865, it not only ruined one of the South's wealthiest dynasties, but also exposed a web of similar schemes across the antebellum South. The truth about that night lay hidden in court files and private letters until a fire in 1923 reduced the last of the evidence to ash. Before we continue with the story of Countess Margot de Villefort and the deadly pact she made, take a moment to join our community of dark history fans, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which state you are tuning in from. We love connecting with mystery lovers across America, and your support keeps these forgotten tales alive. What makes this story especially haunting is how one desperate choice in the middle of the night sent shockwaves through decades, touching politicians, judges, and elite families in ways none of them could imagine. Charleston in 1831 was the crown jewel of Southern society. Its cobblestone streets framed by grand homes that reflected the power of America's cotton aristocracy. The Peton estate dominated an entire city block on East Bay Street, its Georgian facade watching over the busy harbor where ships unloaded fine European goods destined for the parlors of the wealthy Spanish moss, draped across towering oaks, lending an air of timeless elegance to the property. At the head of this empire stood Colonel Harrison Peton, a 52-year-old planter, whose family fortune rested on rice and cotton. He carried himself with authority, serving on the city council and entertaining dignitaries, while still riding his vast low-country fields each day. His wife, however, drew the real attention. Countess Margot de Villefort was only 28 when she arrived from France, fleeing political unrest after the July Revolution. With porcelain skin, striking amber eyes, and a poise that left Charleston matrons self-conscious. She was the kind of beauty society whispered about. She spoke 4 languages, played the piano with breathtaking skill, and moved through drawing rooms as though she had stepped from another world. Alongside her came Celeste, her mixed-race attendant, educated by the Countess on their Atlantic crossing. Celeste could read and write in French and English, abilities rare among the enslaved. Her sharp mind stayed hidden behind a mask of quiet obedience. But her light complexion and refined presence often made visitors mistake her for a free woman. The Countess never corrected them. Life in the household grew complicated despite its polished surface. Colonel Peton admired his wife in public, but his private habits were an open secret among Charleston planters. His late-night visits to the slave quarters were whispered about, though never confronted. The South's unspoken rules demanded such matters. Stay in the shadows, even when those visits produced children whose blood tied them to the house itself. It was not long before Celeste caught the Colonel's eye and the seeds of betrayal were planted. Her education and striking looks set Celeste apart from the rest of the household staff. And it wasn't long before Colonel Peton began calling her to his study in the evenings, at first under the pretense of needing help with French correspondence. Those sessions stretched later into the night, and by the end of 1830, the whispers in the slave quarters left little doubt about the Colonel's true interest. At the same time, the Countess had found a confidant in Dr. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, a fellow French exile, who had built a medical practice among Charleston's upper crust. Rousseau, only in his early 30s, carried the restless energy of a revolutionary. His dark eyes and fiery temperament hinting at the radical views that had driven him from France after publishing tracts against slavery. In Charleston, however, he wisely kept such views quiet while tending to the city's wealthiest families. His visits to the Piton mansion grew more frequent officially, to treat the Countess for what he politely called nervous conditions. Behind closed doors, though, the long conversations in rapid French were less about medicine than companionship, leaving the Countess flushed and lighter in spirit after each session. By winter, the truth could no longer be ignored. Both women were pregnant. The Countess announced her condition with joy, crediting her husband's devotion and the beneficial Carolina air. Colonel Peton publicly basked in the praise of soon having an heir. But in private, he turned more toward his plantations and business affairs, leaving the mansion for long stretches. Celeste's situation was kept quieter. Such pregnancies were common in plantation life and rarely raised eyebrows. The Countess herself explained to her husband that her attendant would not be available for heavy tasks, arranging for Celeste to stay in a cottage on the grounds where she could be better cared for during confinement. But beneath that calm exterior, tension simmered. The Countess began taking long, solitary walks, sometimes stopping to whisper with Celeste in the gardens. The staff noticed her growing unease, though none dared speak of it. The source of her fear lay in two dangerous secrets. Her own unborn child was not her husband's, and Celeste carried the Colonel's. If the truth surfaced, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Countess would be cast out of Charleston society, while Celeste would face separation from her child, likely sold away, as had happened to so many women before her. On the storm-ravaged night of March 15th, 1831, the mansion itself seemed to groan under the weight of those secrets. Rain hammered the tall windows, wind rattled the oaks, and lightning flashed across the harbor, throwing merchant ships into stark silhouette. Inside, the Countess labored upstairs, her cries mingling with the storm, while less than 50 yards away in the cottage, Celeste fought through her own pains, in silence, biting down on leather to avoid being heard. By her side was Mama Ruth, the plantation's midwife, whose 70 years of experience had made her witness to more family scandals than most dared imagine. Near midnight, Dr. Rousseau arrived, drenched from the storm, hurrying to the Countess's chamber, where she gripped the bedpost, her face pale with pain and fear. Colonel Peton waited below in his study, following the custom of Southern men who kept away from such matters. Hours passed in parallel agony, until just before dawn, the Countess delivered her child. Dr. Rousseau's hands trembled as he lifted the infant, the candlelight revealing features that could not be denied. Olive skin, dark hair, unmistakably his own daughter, not the Colonel's heir. In hushed French, he whispered to the exhausted Countess, "She is beautiful." Dr. Rousseau's whispered admiration for the infant carried a weight both he and the Countess understood all too well. This child's existence spelled disaster. If Colonel Peton saw her, there would be no denying the truth that would shatter reputations and ruin lives. Less than an hour later, in the small cottage on the edge of the estate, Mama Ruth guided Celeste through her own labor. The boy who came into the world bore the pale complexion and sharp Piton nose that marked 3 generations. To the midwife, who had delivered the Colonel himself 32 years before, the resemblance was unmistakable. Dawn broke over Charleston, with streets glistening from the night's storm. But inside, both women stared at their newborns with dread. The Countess knew her daughter, with her dark hair and olive skin, could never be passed off as her husband's heir without exposing her betrayal. Celeste held her son tightly, knowing that despite his light features, he would still be raised as a slave, denied the legacy that was rightfully his. It was Dr. Rousseau who finally gave voice to the terrible thought hanging in the air. After confirming that Colonel Peton was busy inspecting storm damage, he returned to the Countess's chamber. His tone was calm, almost clinical, but his words carried the weight of finality. "Your husband expects a son and heir. If he sees this child, the consequences will be catastrophic." The The Countess's amber eyes filled with tears, though she sat upright with the poise of a woman trained never to show weakness. "I know what you are suggesting, Jean-Baptiste," she replied, her voice breaking. But how could such a thing ever be possible? The answer came not from the doctor, but from the doorway. Mama Ruth, stooped with age yet steady in presence, spoke with careful gravity. "Miss Margot, there may be a way to protect both babies." She had seen countless family secrets hidden under the veil of plantation life, and she alone understood the full weight of the decision before them. Celeste's boy could be raised as your son, and your little girl, she could be passed off as Celeste's. Both will live. Both will be safe in their own way. The Countess felt her world tilt, as if the very storm had shifted beneath her. The deception was monstrous, but it was also the only lifeline. Her daughter would grow up in bondage, but alive, while Celeste's boy would step into the privileges of wealth and power that would otherwise be denied him. Dr. Rousseau, his mind turning to practicalities, nodded grimly. "The records must be altered. I will sign as the attending physician, but I will record only one child born to you, a healthy son." Celeste, summoned from her cottage once the colonel departed, listened in silence. Her face betrayed little, but her voice, when it came, was sharp. "What promise do I have that, once this exchange is made, you will not cast me aside? What keeps you from taking my child and leaving me with nothing?" Her question cut through the room like a blade. The Countess met her gaze steadily. "Because we will both be prisoners of the same secret. My daughter's life depends on your silence, just as your son's future depends on my protection. If either of us betrays the other, everything we love is destroyed." As the first rays of sunlight warmed the drenched gardens, the pact was sealed. A physician, a countess, and a slave woman conspired together, bound not by trust, but by desperation. With a stroke of a pen and the silence of those who knew too much, two children's fates were exchanged, a deception that would ripple through generations, twisting the legacy of the Piton family beyond recognition. Celeste publicly accepted the mixed-race girl as her own, quietly shouldering the burden of raising a child who was not hers by blood, while the Countess took Celeste's son into her arms and presented him as the long-awaited Piton heir. The exchange happened quickly before Colonel Piton returned from surveying storm damage on his plantations. Mama Ruth swaddled both infants with a practiced care that made the handoff appear seamless to anyone who had not witnessed the truth. To the outside world, nothing seemed unusual. To those inside that candlelit chamber, it was the start of a lifelong masquerade. The colonel returned to a house brimming with pride. He named the boy Charles Harrison Piton after his own grandfather, and from the very start, the child embodied the role of future master. With his fair skin and sharp features, young Charles drew admiration from visiting families who remarked on how strikingly he resembled his father. No one questioned the line of succession. Meanwhile, the Countess remained curiously devoted to Celeste's daughter, naming her Marie, and ensuring she received an education alongside Charles. Her justification was simple. Charles needed a companion of equal refinement, but her insistence raised quiet questions among Charleston society. Still, relatives dismissed her unusual attachment as eccentricity, and life at the mansion continued with the deception intact. Dr. Rousseau's presence became a fixture, his role as family physician giving him cover to monitor the children closely. He adjusted their diets, oversaw their lessons, and crafted explanations for any small resemblance that threatened to betray the truth. But the real test came when Charles reached 5. The boy's intelligence astonished everyone he read, early grasped numbers with startling ease, and revealed a musical ear that rivaled his mother's. His gifts, however, made him restless, and soon he began to question what set him apart from the other planter children. "Why do I not look like Cousin Edmund?" he asked one afternoon, noticing differences in complexion and features. The Countess brushed it off, claiming he resembled his father's side of the family. But Charles pressed with questions that unsettled her carefully built facade. What truly alarmed her was the closeness between Charles and Marie. Despite their supposed social divide, the two children were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and displaying an uncanny connection that unsettled everyone who knew the secret. Celeste, now serving as head of household staff, watched her son grow into privilege with a pride she could never voice while hiding her heartbreak. She slipped guidance into his education, correcting his French, steering his reading, shielding him subtly from the harsher edges of plantation discipline. With Marie, the emotions were more tangled. Celeste loved the girl deeply, but every triumph Charles enjoyed was a reminder of what her true daughter was being denied. The Countess's obsession with control grew stronger each year. She dictated their studies, selected their companions, and scrutinized their every word, fearing that an innocent comment might expose what she had fought to conceal. Her anxiety bled into her health and her relationships, though she cloaked it beneath the guise of fierce maternal devotion. Dr. Rousseau saw what others did not. The trembling hands of a woman who lived in constant fear, the hollow ache in Celeste's eyes as she served in silence, and two children bound by an unspoken truth they could not yet name. By the late 1830s, Charleston society had begun whispering about the Piton household in ways that could no longer be ignored. It was one thing for a planter's wife to favor a servant, but Countess Margot's devotion to Marie went well beyond what tradition tolerated. The girl wore dresses finer than most free children, dined with the family when company wasn't present, and was tutored side by side with young Charles as though she were his equal. At a tea in 1837, Mrs. Cornelius Whitlock voiced what many were already thinking. That French woman spoils her house slaves beyond all reason. Mark my words, nothing good comes from slaves who forget their place. The gossip spread quickly, and soon enough it reached Colonel Peyton. One evening, he confronted his wife in the study, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Margot, I've been told troubling things about the way you manage this household, particularly concerning that mulatto girl you've grown so attached to." The Countess felt her chest tighten, but she kept her composure. "Marie is exceptionally intelligent," she answered evenly. "I thought it wise for Charles to have a companion who could challenge him academically. A bright child encourages brighter habits." The Colonel's face hardened. "Educated slaves become rebellious slaves. And our neighbors are talking. It reflects poorly on our name." His warning was clear, his patience was running thin. That night, once the house had gone quiet, the Countess summoned Celeste. Her words fell like stones. "Marie must be sold. My husband is suspicious. If we continue as we have, everything, Charles's future, your son's inheritance, my daughter's safety could unravel." Celeste froze the room, spinning around her. "You promised she would be protected," she whispered. The Countess's tears betrayed the calm tone she struggled to keep. "And she will be. I'll see to it that she's sent to a family in Savannah, one that will treat her well. She will have care, perhaps even education. But she cannot remain here." The cruelty of it was undeniable. To preserve the deception that gave Charles legitimacy, the Countess was forced to sacrifice her own daughter into the very system she had sought to shield her from. Celeste recognized the bitter logic, even as her heart cracked under the weight of it. She had raised Marie as her own for 6 years, and now she would lose her, as though none of it had mattered. The loss shattered Charles. Barely 6 years old, he refused food, ignored his studies, and fell into a brooding silence that unsettled everyone in the mansion. Worst of all, he began asking questions that cut dangerously close to the truth. "She was my sister," he said, with fierce conviction. Not my slave, my sister. And sisters should not be sold. His words, innocent yet piercing, sent a chill through those who carried the secret. Dr. Rousseau cautioned that the boy's grief might grow into a lasting instability, but the Countess knew better. Charles's bond with Marie had always been unusual, as though some unspoken recognition tied them together. By tearing them apart, she had only deepened the mystery that pulsed beneath their lives. Still, the sale went forward, arranged through discreet intermediaries to leave no suspicious record. Marie was transferred to the Carrington family in Savannah, her history rewritten to portray her as an overly indulged house slave. The Countess had done everything in her power to soften the cruelty of Marie's sale, sending the Carrington family in Savannah a generous sum, with strict instructions that the girl be given schooling and treated with unusual care. Of course, she could never explain why this mattered so deeply, not without unraveling the secret that bound them all. When the day came, Marie was hidden in the back of a merchant's wagon and carried away from Charleston. From separate windows of the Piton mansion, two women, mistress and slave mother and mother, watched the child disappear down the oak-lined avenue. Neither could show their grief openly, but each betrayed it in her own way. Celeste's shoulders trembled with stifled sobs, while the Countess's white-knuckled grip on the window frame revealed her inner torment. Outside, Charles ran screaming after the wagon until a coachman dragged him back, his cries of "Bring back my sister" echoing down the street. Neighbors heard, and though they said nothing openly, their exchanged glances carried the weight of gossip that would not easily fade. Marie's absence changed everything inside the mansion. Charles at 7 fell into a deep melancholy that no comfort could dispel. He excelled in his studies, mastering Latin by 8, displaying a startling grasp of logic and law. But beneath his brilliance lay a restless suspicion. It was as if losing Marie had awakened something sharper, a need to question the world around him. The Countess, desperate to secure the deception and shape Charles into the perfect heir, poured herself into his education. Tutors were brought from across Charleston, lessons overseen with fanatical care, and his days filled with study and refinement. Yet her very intensity created its own danger. Charles began to turn that same analytical gaze back on her. "Mother," he asked one morning in 1838, his tone grave for a child, "why do you watch me so carefully when you think I am not looking?" The question nearly stopped her heart. She forced a calm reply. "All mothers watch their children." But Charles persisted. "Not like you do. You watch me as if you are afraid I will vanish. And sometimes when you look at me, you seem sad. Why do I make you sad?" These questions came more often as the boy grew, and each time the Countess felt her carefully constructed facade strain under the weight of his intuition. Celeste, now promoted to head housekeeper, kept her own silent vigil. Her elevated position gave her access to correspondence, travel arrangements, and household accounts. More importantly, it allowed her to feed her own network of information, a clandestine chain of communication carried from plantation to plantation. Through whispers exchanged in kitchens and stables, she learned that Marie was thriving in Savannah, receiving lessons and showing the same startling intellect that marked Charles. That knowledge eased her despair, but also deepened her fear. Two brilliant children bound by blood, separated by lies. Dr. Rousseau remained a steady presence, though his role had shifted from physician to confidant and counselor. He treated the Countess for headaches and fainting spells that came with increasing frequency, and spoke quietly to Celeste when her tension threatened to spill over into the household. He saw clearly what others would not admit. "This cannot last forever," he warned Margot in 1839. "Charles is too clever, too observant. It is only a matter of time before he uncovers what you have hidden." His prediction would come true sooner than any of them could have imagined. By the summer of 1840, Charles was 9 years old and far too curious for the fragile secret that bound the Piton household. One humid afternoon, while rummaging through the mansion's library, he stumbled across a small stack of his mother's private papers left unlocked in a desk drawer. Among them lay a letter penned by Dr. Rousseau in the weeks after the stormy night of the children's births. The words were measured but unmistakable references to the delicate arrangement, our agreement, and most damning of all, a line naming Marie as the other child involved. Charles could not fully decipher every implication, but his sharp mind knew he had uncovered something extraordinary. That evening at supper, he tested what he had learned. With the calm directness of a boy who already understood the power of questions, he looked across the table and asked, "What exchange were you and Dr. Rousseau discussing in your letter about Marie and me?" The dining room froze. Colonel Piton stared at his son in confusion, having no idea what letter was being referenced. The Countess felt her blood run cold. Only Celeste, standing silently with the serving tray, grasped the enormity of the danger. Margot forced a smile, her voice carefully even. "I don't know what you mean, darling." But Charles's gaze cut through her. "You do know," he said softly. "And someday I'm going to find out what really happened the night I was born." The words, simple and chilling, landed like a declaration of war. Later that night, Colonel Piton pressed his wife in private. "What letter? What exchange?" Margot, still shaken, wove a hasty explanation about old correspondence regarding household accounts. The colonel seemed to accept it on the surface, but a seed of doubt had been planted. From that moment forward, she saw a new watchfulness in his eyes, a subtle shift that made the deception even more precarious. Charles, meanwhile, began his own investigations. He questioned household staff about the night of his birth, scrutinized family portraits with the precision of a scholar, and even attempted to send letters to relatives in France, hoping to piece together fragments of truth. His inquiries often circled back to Celeste, whose elevated role gave her access to records and long memory of the family. "Miss Celeste," he asked one afternoon in 1841, "do you remember anything unusual about the night I was born?" Her pulse quickened, but her expression betrayed nothing. "It was a terrible storm," she said carefully. "Rain like Judgment Day. Trees coming down everywhere. That's what I remember." But Charles was relentless. "Do you remember anything about Marie being born too around the same time?" The question hung in the air like a noose tightening. Celeste, with years of practice in masking her emotions, answered evenly. "Lots of babies born during storms. Storms bring them on, so I've heard. I was only helping Mama Ruth. Wasn't my place to pay attention to such things." Yet Charles studied her face with unsettling intensity. His eyes so piercing they reminded her of herself in a mirror she dared not look into. "You liked Marie very much," he pressed. "More than most slaves like other slaves' children." Celeste let a trace of warmth slip into her voice. "Marie was a sweet child. Anyone would have loved her." Charles went quiet, but his next words chilled her. "I still dream about her sometimes. I dream that she was not really your daughter at all, that she was something else, someone else." The conversation ended, but Celeste understood then that Charles's dreams were pulling him toward truths his conscious mind had yet to articulate. He was sleepwalking into revelation, and she had no way to stop it. That same year, another threat loomed. Colonel Piton's health began to falter. His once commanding presence weakened by illness. Whispers about succession spread through Charleston. Charles the heir was expected to begin showing signs of leadership, his education scrutinized more closely by relatives and neighbors alike. Legal preparations for inheritance would soon be required, and with them the risk that inconsistencies in the records could surface. The Countess felt the walls closing in the weight of 2 decades of lies, pressing harder than ever. But the most dangerous threat of all was not Charles's questions, nor the Colonel's decline. It came from beyond the mansion gates, where old enemies and jealous rivals in Charleston society had begun to sense that something was deeply amiss in the Peaton household. By the end of 1841, the deception that had sustained the Peaton household for over a decade was trembling on its foundations. News traveled back from Savannah that Marie, now 10, was astonishing the Carrington family with her intellect. Her talent was so undeniable that they were considering the radical idea of sending her north for formal schooling and education that could grant her the tools and connections to trace her own shadowed beginnings. The thought chilled the Countess. 2 brilliant children bound by blood yet raised apart were unknowingly converging toward the same hidden truth. To preserve the illusion, she now faced choices darker than anything she had previously imagined. By 1842, Charles had grown into a sharp and unrelenting boy of 11. His brilliance no longer resembled childish curiosity. It had hardened into methodical investigation. He asked probing questions, tested the consistency of answers, and studied people with the cold precision of a future lawyer. The Countess's obsession with molding him into the perfect heir had created not only a prodigy, but a relentless seeker of truth. The fragile balance collapsed when Charles uncovered the existence of Dr. Rousseau's second journal. He had long noticed the doctor's scribbling in a different volume than the official medical ledgers, and during a social visit that autumn he acted. While his mother chatted in the parlor, Charles slipped into Rousseau's study and with unnerving efficiency located the journal. What he found confirmed every dark suspicion. The entries detailed the secret exchange of infants, precise medical notes on both children's progress, and records of large payments made by the Countess to guarantee silence. But what truly unsettled Charles were the more recent entries. Rousseau's hand grew shakier, his tone more unhinged. He confessed to drinking heavily, racked by guilt, fearful of discovery. The boy suspects everything, one entry warned in August 1842. Each month his questions grow sharper. The Countess speaks of measures that terrify even me. How long can this masquerade endure before it consumes us all? Even more troubling were Rousseau's notes about Savannah. The Carringtons had written with questions about Marie's heritage. They had noticed the girl's features, her fine bone structure, her amber-tinted eyes, so out of keeping with the ancestry they believed. Marie, like Charles, was growing into her true bloodline, and the resemblance to European aristocracy was becoming harder to dismiss. Charles carefully copied the most damning passages before restoring the journal to its hiding place. When he rejoined the adults, he carried himself with the calm of a child who knew he had acquired something more valuable than gold. That evening, in his mother's private chambers, he laid the evidence before her. "I know about the exchange," he said, his voice steady. "Marie was your daughter. I am the son of a slave. What I cannot understand is why you have gone to such lengths to keep the lie alive." The Countess, cornered at last, drew on every ounce of her training. "If you understand those papers, then you know the cost of revealing them," she whispered. Charles, already wise beyond his years, laid out the truth with chilling clarity. "You would be disgraced, cast out. I would lose everything, my inheritance, my education, even my freedom. We are both prisoners of this secret." "Precisely," the Countess murmured. But she saw in his eyes something more dangerous than anger calculation. "There is another prisoner of this secret," Charles said coldly. "My real mother. The slave who has watched me grow up without ever being allowed to claim me. What will you do about her?" The Countess felt the ground shift beneath her. This was no longer a child's defiance. Her son had become a strategist, using the truth not as a weapon to destroy her, but as leverage to reshape his own future. The deception had given Charles privilege, but now he intended to wield it against the very structure that sustained him. Celeste has been well cared for, the Countess insisted, her voice sharp with defensiveness. She holds authority in this house that most slaves could never dream of. But Charles met her words with unnerving calm. She is still a slave, and I am living the life meant for Marie. That fact binds me to certain obligations. His tone carried more than defiance, it carried intent. He wasn't seeking simple acknowledgement of the truth. He was already reshaping the arrangement to suit his own vision of justice. Over the weeks that followed, Charles began executing a quiet campaign of leverage that revealed a mind far older than his years. He went first to Celeste, seizing moments when the Countess could not interfere. "I know you are my mother," he said plainly one morning as she oversaw household cleaning. "And I know Marie lives as a slave while I wear the privileges that belong to her." Celeste froze. Though she had braced herself for this moment, the sound of the truth in his voice cut through her carefully guarded composure. "What you know and what you can prove are not the same," she replied cautiously, speaking as one who had survived slavery by measuring every word. Charles leaned closer. "I can prove everything. Dr. Rousseau's journals record the deception in detail. But I don't want to destroy you. I want justice." What he proposed was audacious, redirecting portions of his future inheritance to benefit both Celeste and Marie. He had already studied inheritance law, identifying loopholes and mechanisms that could funnel wealth to them without exposing their true relationship. To succeed, he needed their cooperation. If they refused, he warned he would reveal the secret and let the pieces fall where they may. For the Countess, it was a nightmare. Charles had taken her greatest weapon, the truth, and turned it into his own tool of control. He offered her a choice: allow him to carve away pieces of the family fortune or risk utter ruin when the secret inevitably spilled into Charleston society. She knew immediately which choice she would be forced to make. But not everyone could withstand Charles's cold logic. When the Countess explained his demands to Dr. Rousseau, the fragile doctor unraveled completely. He stormed into the mansion one winter night, drunk and trembling. "He wants to destroy us all," Rousseau raved, pacing the parlor with bloodshot eyes. "That child is a demon, a punishment for our sins." The Countess tried to reason with him, but his paranoia was unshakable. He ranted that Charles would have them arrested for fraud, that he would drag their names through court. Then his whispers turned darker. "It could be solved with one accident," he muttered. "A fall from a horse, a slip from the roof. Children die in such ways all the time. No one questions tragedy." The Countess recoiled in horror, but she knew Rousseau was slipping beyond her control. His knowledge of their secret gave him dangerous power, and in his instability, he was capable of both confession and violence. Meanwhile, Charles was no idle player. He had already begun writing covert letters to Savannah using aliases and trusted intermediaries. His inquiries confirmed that Marie was thriving intellectually, her resemblance to aristocratic bloodlines becoming harder to explain away. The Carrington family themselves had written to Charleston with questions, puzzled by her European features and demanding details of her background. Rousseau had dodged them with vague claims of unusual inheritance patterns, but the Carringtons were persistent, and suspicion was growing. The fragile house of cards reached crisis in December 1842. Charles had taken to evening walks in the mansion gardens, using the solitude to sharpen his plans for reshaping the family's legacy. That month, Dr. Rousseau lay in wait beneath the oaks, clutching a loaded pistol, convinced he could end the danger with a single shot. His scheme was simple: make it appear that Charles had fallen victim to a robbery attempt by escaped slaves. It would be tragic, yes, but believable. And with the boy gone, so too would be the threat of exposure. Charles's sharp instincts saved him the night Rousseau crouched in the garden shadows. Before the doctor could steady his hand, The boy stepped deliberately into the lantern glow, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. "Dr. Russo," he said evenly, his voice carrying no trace of fear despite the pistol aimed at his chest. "I expected you would come to this. Your journals reveal the spiral you've been trapped in. Desperation, guilt, paranoia. Desperation leads to mistakes, and tonight you've made one." Russo's hands shook as he muttered, "You should have left well enough alone, boy." "Some secrets destroy everyone who touches them." Charles tilted his head with unnerving composure. "And killing me would guarantee exposure. I've already hidden copies of the evidence. If anything happens to me, they will surface. You wouldn't just end me, Doctor, you'd end yourself, the Countess, and everything you've tried to preserve." The words struck like hammer blows. Russo faltered, the pistol sagging toward the ground, as he realized the boy had cornered him with logic sharper than any blade. Charles pressed the advantage. "You've become a liability. Your drinking, your raving, your threats, they make you the weak link. If you wish to survive, you should leave Charleston before you bring ruin on us all." The command sounded more like a verdict. Within a week, Russo had sold his practice, muttered something about family obligations, and disappeared north, leaving behind the wreckage of his reputation and the stain of his secrets. For the Countess and Celeste, his departure was a relief. For Charles, it was proof of something more chilling, that at 11 years old, he now controlled the conspiracy his elders had once forced upon him. He had outmaneuvered the doctor, subdued his mother, and bound Celeste to his cause, not with threats, but with promises of justice. Yet control came with burdens. The winter of 1843 brought Charles to a crossroads. Through his clandestine correspondence, he learned that Marie, now called Maria Carrington, had become the subject of abolitionist interest in Savannah. Northern investigators from the American Anti-Slavery Society, traveling south to expose fraudulent slave trading practices, had noticed her unusual refinement, her education, and her striking resemblance to European nobility. They suspected she had been kidnapped or illegally enslaved, and they were preparing to file challenges in court. The news struck like thunder. For the first time, the Piton's secret would face scrutiny, not from gossiping planters or paranoid physicians, but from trained lawyers and abolitionists armed with resources far greater than their own. They would demand birth records, sworn testimony, and medical history. They would ask questions none of the conspirators could safely answer. But Charles was no longer the child stumbling into hidden letters or journals. He had grown into something more dangerous, a strategist with the clarity of youth and the cold precision of a man twice his age. As he read the reports from Savannah, he understood the stakes. The deception that had shaped his life was about to collide with a movement determined to expose it. And the choice before him, whether to protect the illusion or embrace the truth, would decide not only his future, but Marie's, and perhaps the fate of the Piton legacy itself. By the spring of 1843, Charles was no longer just a clever boy probing at family secrets. He had become an architect of destruction. At 12 years old, he had spent months shaping a plan that would not only expose the Piton deception, but also rewrite the fates of the three people who mattered most to him: Celeste, his true mother; Marie, his stolen sister; and himself. His motives had hardened into a mix of justice and vengeance. He wanted freedom for Celeste, legitimacy for Marie, and ruin for the family name that had thrived on lies. His chance arrived in May, when Colonel Piton was struck down by a massive stroke. The once commanding patriarch lingered half-paralyzed and unable to speak, leaving the Countess to manage the collapsing empire alone. Lawyers and judges began circling, expecting Charles to take his place as heir to prove himself worthy in courtrooms and ledgers. It was the perfect stage for Charles's coup. He sought out Judge Samuel Thornbury, a family ally, who had known the Pitons for decades. In a private meeting, Charles delivered his case not with the stammering nerves of a boy, but with the deliberate clarity of a seasoned advocate. He laid out copied journal entries, letters, and discrepancies in birth records that left little doubt. His identity was the product of fraud, conspiracy, and a calculated exchange. Thornbury, stunned, leaned back in his chair. These are grave accusations, Charles. If they are true, they strip you of your inheritance and expose your family to prosecution. I understand, Charles replied calmly. But truth must outweigh privilege. My mother deserves freedom. My sister deserves her rightful place. Their justice matters more than my comfort. The judge studied him, torn between duty and disbelief. You are asking me to help you dismantle your own family's legacy. I am asking you to help me dismantle a lie. Charles corrected, his voice cold but steady. Thornbury, impressed and unsettled, agreed to begin a discreet inquiry. But he also insisted on first confronting the Countess directly, to give her one last chance to reckon with the child she had raised and the secret she had guarded. The confrontation came in the library of the Peaton mansion, beneath rows of leather-bound law books and portraits of ancestors whose stern gazes now seemed like a cruel mockery. Colonel Peaton lay unconscious upstairs, oblivious that his life's work was disintegrating below. The Countess, her poise fraying at last, faced her son across the table. You have won, she whispered, her voice brittle as glass. What happens now? Charles's answer was precise, merciless. Marie returns to Charleston as my sister, with her share of the inheritance secured. Celeste is freed and provided for. And you, he let the word hang heavy, you must live with what you chose. The Countess's amber eyes, once her shield, brimmed with a grief she could not mask. And you, Charles? What happens when Charleston learns their heir is the son of a slave? For the first time, Charles faltered. The truth would destroy him as surely as it destroyed her. His inheritance, his education, his place in society, all gone. Yet his expression did not waver when he answered. I will face whatever comes. But I will face it knowing I chose justice over privilege, truth over comfort. The Countess turned away. Her composure shattered. She had built an empire of lies to protect him, only to see him tear it down in pursuit of a justice that would consume them both. The Countess studied the boy who had undone her life's work with the precision of a general dismantling an enemy fortification. You realize, she whispered, her voice weary with defeat, that Marie may not thank you for this. She has lived 12 years as a slave. To be told suddenly that she was stolen from her birthright may not bring her joy, it may only bring her rage. For the first time, Charles faltered. Until then, he had thought only of truth, justice, and revenge. He had not considered that the sister he longed to restore might see his revelations as yet another theft, one that stripped her of the life she had made for herself. The court moved swiftly. Judge Thornbury's inquiry uncovered altered records, forged medical notes, and testimony from household staff who admitted to the whispers of that stormy night in 1831. The truth was undeniable. The infants had been switched. Under court protection, Marie was brought from Savannah to Charleston. The reunion between brother and sister was as heartbreaking as it was unsettling. Charles, molded by privilege and education, carried himself with calm calculation. Marie, brilliant in her own right, had survived years of degradation and hardship. She was wary, sharp-edged, and possessed a resilience Charles could never fully grasp. When the truth was laid bare before her, she turned not to gratitude, but fury. You stole 12 years from us both, she told the Countess in the courthouse, her voice shaking with righteous anger. 12 years of my birthright, 12 years of his identity. No law can return what you took. But her anger did not stop with the Countess. She turned on Charles as well. Did you ask me if I wanted this? Did you think to wonder whether I wanted to be rescued? You chose the moment that suited you. You played justice like a game of chess, and I was your pawn. Her words struck Charles harder than any court ruling. For all his brilliance, he had never accounted for the possibility that the justice he pursued was not hers. His campaign had been as much about revenge against the Countess as about redemption for Marie. Now in her eyes, he was not savior, but manipulator. The court's decision came in September 1843. Marie was freed and granted a portion of the Piton inheritance under her rightful name. Celeste, too, received her freedom along with financial security that elevated her into Charleston's free black community. But the Piton family itself was shattered. The scandal spread across Charleston like fire through dry grass. Colonel Piton, half paralyzed in his upstairs chamber, watched helplessly as 3 generations of legacy crumbled. The Countess, stripped of her standing and haunted by the wreckage of her choices, fled to France. In October, she entered a convent, vowing to spend the rest of her life in repentance. Charles had achieved everything he had set out to do. The truth was exposed. His mother and sister were free. The Piton name was ruined. Yet triumph tasted bitter. Charleston society, fascinated by scandal, but rigid in its prejudices, could not accept him as heir once it was revealed that he was the son of a slave. In their eyes, he was neither Piton nor gentleman, only an interloper who had destroyed a dynasty. By 1844, Charles had left Charleston under a new name, Charles Rousseau. With part of his inheritance, he enrolled at Harvard Law, where he built a career as a formidable attorney in the emerging field of civil rights and inheritance law. He became a voice for others, trapped by America's cruel racial classifications, dismantling injustices, one case at a time. Yet in his private writings, he confessed to a life haunted by doubt. He questioned whether his pursuit of justice had been driven by principle or by the cold hunger for revenge against a woman who had deceived him. He never married, never built a family of his own, and when he died in 1889, his journals revealed a man who had conquered law, but never silence in his soul. Marie's path was equally complex. Though legally restored to wealth, she carried the scars of slavery too deeply to be erased by court orders. She married a free man of color in Philadelphia and dedicated her inheritance to founding schools for freed children across the South. She became a figure of inspiration, yet those closest to her knew she never escaped bitterness. She often spoke of the 12 years stolen from her years in which her brother had lived in privilege while she endured chains. Celeste, against all odds, found the most peace. Freed at last, she became a respected leader within Charleston's free black community. Using her literacy and organizational skills, she helped others navigate the labyrinth of emancipation laws. Yet even she admitted in interviews decades later that the secret had left wounds that never closed. Watching her son grow into privilege while her daughter lived in bondage had broken something inside her that no freedom could mend. As for the Piton estate, it too bore the scars of betrayal. Sold off after the colonel's death in 1845, the mansion became a boarding house for sailors. Its halls, once filled with secrets and lies, echoed with laughter and coarse songs of men who knew nothing of the blood-stained deception that had taken place within its walls. The Piton scandal became legend in Charleston, told in hushed tones as a cautionary tale about the danger of secrets. But beneath the gossip and moralizing the truth remained far more tragic. 3 lives torn apart by a decision made in a single stormy night of 1831. And a justice that, when it finally arrived, brought ruin as much as it brought freedom. The Piton case did more than destroy a single Charleston dynasty. It exposed the cracks in an entire social system built on fragile illusions. Legal scholars who dissected the scandal saw in it a devastating truth that racial identity, the very foundation of America's inheritance and property laws, was not fixed, but could be bent, reshaped, and even forged when it suited the powerful. Judge Samuel Thornbury, who presided over the case later, wrote that the Peton affair revealed the law itself as a theater of deception, where ancestry was performed rather than proven. His writings argued that reforms in inheritance and racial classification were inevitable, because no society could stand indefinitely on such arbitrary ground. Outside the courtroom, the Peton scandal slipped into Charleston folklore, its moral edges sanded down for parlor storytelling. Some remembered the Countess as a tragic heroine undone by forces beyond her control. Others cast Charles as a cold prodigy who had destroyed his family for revenge. The messy ambiguity of truth was lost in favor of cleaner tales, easier to digest and safer to repeat. Yet beneath every retelling lingered the darker reality. 2 children had been forced to carry the weight of lies, crafted by adults who insisted they acted in love. Neither Charles nor Marie ever escaped the scars. His brilliance carried him to Harvard and into the courts of the North. But his journals revealed a man who questioned until his death whether his pursuit of justice had been noble or poisoned by vengeance. Her inheritance freed her, but it could not restore the childhood she had been denied. She turned her pain into purpose, founding schools for freed children. Yet those close to her whispered that bitterness shadowed even her brightest days. And Celeste, the mother who had watched one child rise in privilege while another grew in bondage, spoke years later of wounds that no freedom could mend. The Countess in the convent, where she spent her final years, perhaps named the tragedy best. We sought to protect our children from cruelty, she confessed in her last letter, but instead condemned them to cruelties far worse than anything society might have imposed. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and ours were very good indeed. The Peton mansion itself met a fitting end. Demolished in 1923, after a mysterious fire consumed many of the courthouse records tied to the scandal, it left behind nothing but whispers and a modest historical marker. That plaque speaks blandly of inheritance law and antebellum society, omitting any mention of switched infants' deception or the pact that destroyed a dynasty. Visitors passed by, never knowing that beneath Charleston's manicured facades once lay a secret that revealed how fragile truth and identity could be. The Peton case remains more than a tale of one family. It is a reminder of how the sins of one generation echo into the lives of the next, and how lies crafted to protect can instead corrupt everything they touch. What do you think? Was the Peton affair an isolated scandal, or were there countless others buried in courthouse fires, whispered away in drawing rooms, and lost beneath the weight of history? Share your thoughts below, and if you want more forgotten mysteries that challenge what we think we know about America's past, subscribe and stay with us. In our next story, we'll unearth another scandal that blurred the lines between justice, identity, and survival in ways just as haunting.